When you think about Christianity in Brazil, your mind probably jumps to two things: massive, historic Catholic cathedrals, or maybe those huge, vibrant Pentecostal services. But something else is happening, something unexpected. A centuries-old, really structured kind of faith is finding this incredible new life in one of the world's most dynamic Christian countries. So today, we're going to dig into the surprising boom of Calvinism in Brazil.
Okay, so to really get why this is such a big deal, we need to set the scene first. Because the backdrop to this whole story is a period of just absolutely explosive religious growth in Brazil over the last handful of decades.
I mean, just look at the scale of this shift. In only 30 years, the evangelical population just skyrocketed from 6% to 22% of the entire country. We're talking about a jump from around 8 million people to over 42 million. And get this, the huge majority of that growth, it was happening in Pentecostal churches.
So the crazy growth itself isn't really the surprise here. The real twist, the thing that makes this story so interesting, is where a lot of these believers are now turning to find their theological footing.
And this quote just nails the paradox, right? Pentecostalism, which is so well known for focusing on personal experience, spiritual gifts, speaking in tongues, is now getting really into Calvinism, a tradition that's famous for its super detailed doctrines and its focus on God's absolute sovereignty. I mean, it's a theological crossover that pretty much nobody saw coming.
So all of this brings us to the big question we're going to try to answer today. Is this a return to something that was already there, kind of buried, or is this movement something fundamentally new for Brazil?
Answering this question is really the key to the whole thing. Are Brazilians just uncovering some forgotten roots, or are they basically importing and adapting this tradition for the very first time? Let's do some digging.
To get our answer, we've got to look back. I mean, did Calvinism ever really have a strong foothold in Brazil's past?
Well, as you can see, the history is spotty, at best. You had these brief, totally isolated attempts back in the 16th and 17th centuries, but they just fizzled out and left no real legacy. A continuous presence didn't even start until Presbyterian missionaries showed up in the 19th century. But even then, it's not a simple story. And here's the crucial part. The very specific, nuanced Calvinism those missionaries brought with them, it got absorbed pretty quickly into this broader culture. See, the main priority in Brazil at the time was just evangelism, presenting a united Protestant front against the totally dominant Catholic culture. So this led to what's called a revivalistic spirit, which really focuses on conversion and emotional experiences, not deep theological arguments. The finer points of Calvinism, they just kind of got smoothed over for the sake of cooperation.
And here it is. This is a massive clue in our investigation. For a tradition that is built on deep, careful theological study, the most foundational books just weren't even available for Brazilians to read in their own language.
Just let that sink in for a second. 1985. John Calvin's magnum opus, the absolute cornerstone of Reformed theology, was only translated into Portuguese a few decades ago. That's a huge piece of the puzzle, and it strongly suggests we're looking at a pretty recent discovery, not some ancient rediscovery.
Okay, so if the historical roots are pretty shallow, what in the world is happening today? Let's fast forward to the present and take a look at what this new Brazilian Calvinism actually looks like on the ground.
Well, the spread has been incredibly fast, and it's been fueled by totally modern tools. All of a sudden, hundreds of Reformed books are available in Portuguese. Huge conferences started drawing these massive crowds. And of course, the internet played a massive role. You had subtitled sermons by American preachers that reached millions of people, creating this huge appetite for this kind of theology. And all of this was backed up by new training programs in theological schools. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. Calvinist in Brazil doesn't just mean one thing. It's kind of split into a few different camps. First, you've got the Five Pointers. These are folks who are super passionate about soteriology, the doctrines of salvation. Then you have the World Changers, and they're focused more on social justice and the cultural mandate, this idea that Christians have a duty to transform society. And finally, you've got the Neo-Puritans, who are trying to recover very specific 17th century worship practices, like exclusive psalmody, which means only singing psalms from the Bible in church. So yeah, it's not one single movement, but more like several different streams all flowing at once. And this quote from a Pentecostal pastor just captures the incredible synergy that's developing. You see, for a lot of people, there's no conflict here. They believe that the God who is totally sovereign in salvation, which is the Calvinist emphasis, is the exact same God who gives power for service, the Pentecostal emphasis. It's a theological blend, a new kind of synthesis that's uniquely Brazilian. Okay, so where does all this leave us? We've looked at the history, we've seen the modern boom and its different flavors. I think now we can finally answer that central question we started with. So here's the verdict. It's kind of both. For so many individuals, it's a powerful rediscovery of these core ideas about salvation, the so-called doctrines of grace. But for the Brazilian church as a whole, it's really the first ever discovery of the broader Reformed tradition, everything from its views on culture to worship to how to read the whole Bible.
So what's next? Well, proponents argue that for this movement to really mature, it needs to go deeper. And that means embracing big concepts like covenant theology, which is a way of seeing the Bible as one single unfolding story. It also means broadening their historical knowledge beyond just John Calvin, and crucially, applying all this deep theology to practical areas like missions and counseling.
And let's be clear, the stakes here are really high. This isn't just some small academic debate. This movement is young, it's full of energy, and it has the real potential to profoundly shape the future of Christianity in Brazil, which happens to be one of the largest and most influential Christian nations on the entire planet.
So, we're going to end with this question. What we're watching here is a centuries-old European theology being completely reimagined and revitalized in a uniquely Brazilian context. And the big question isn't just how Brazil will change Calvinism, but how this booming, complex, and passionate movement will ultimately change the future of Brazil itself.